Okay. How's it going, everyone? Everyone hear me? Everything all good? Okay. Um, all right. Let's do this. How's it going, guys? It's been a little while since I've done a stream. I figured, because the way I normally do streams, like some of you know, it's rather unstructured. And in the spirit of structuring what we do, I suppose, I figured we would do this. This has been kind of a big request to do a sort of watch party sort of thing. So, or at least around this debate, that is. So I think that's kind of cool. It sounds like a good idea. I guess right now what we can do is probably chill just a little bit, wait for a couple more people to come in, and yeah. Holy Eurorack synthesizers. Yeah, I got a couple synthesizers back there. Um, I'm uh I'm a big synth head. When you get the bug, the synthesizers, it's hard to stop. Got a Behringer Model D, Behringer Cat, got just a miscellaneous modules right there. Novation Peak and then Behringer Crave for any of you synth and music heads out there. I like my hardware stuff. I honestly like I this is really fucked up as far as synthesizers go. Talking about this. I think digital synthesizers are better all around, but I have a bunch of hardware synths because I'm just that way. Yeah. What books are these? That is Critique of Pure Reason and then The Dialectic of Enlightenment. I am working on The Dialectic of Enlightenment in video form right now. So that's pretty cool, I think. Um, why would Foucault even bother talking to some rad lib linguist? Overhyped by high schoolers who are just getting into big questions. You sound like a wonderful person to be around. Absolute wonder. All right. Talking French. I don't know any French. I know like nothing. I took 3 years of Spanish in college, or I shouldn't say 3 years, 3 semesters. Um, and I still don't really know Spanish that well because that's just how American language education goes. Tips on being able to read more. All right, massive tip. And you guys will be able to get through way more books than what you imagine. Read 5 to 6 pages a day, or yeah, just literally just before you go to bed. Before you go to bed, you're laying down, read 5 to 6 pages. Carve out a little bit of time where you can do that, and it's easy. I shit you not, that's literally, I don't always do that, but that's what I'm doing right now with one book. I'm reading Max Weber, The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, and then I've been reading throughout some of my day Critique of Pure Reason, because we're doing a little study group and seminar thing on Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. So if any of you guys want to join, please do. Join on Patreon and in the Discord. It's a lot of fun. I like it. I think it's a good way to approach Kant as well with other people. Also, what's cool, if you guys think about doing that, I have some videos up of all our meetings, so they're all recorded as well. Okay, portraying Chomsky as a rad lib really shows you haven't read any Chomsky. I don't think whatever rad lib means to whoever, I don't think Chomsky's that. But for Chomsky and all his small, I suppose, flaws. Yeah. All right. So I think we got 50 people in here. That's really cool. Thank you guys for all being in here. This should be a lot of fun. I got my drink handy, and then I got it all pulled up. So maybe let's get into it. All right. Sorry. Okay.
Toen Galilei in de 17e eeuw ontdekte dat de aarde om de zon
Fuck it.
draaide in plaats
We'll do
van
it live.
omgekeerd, was dat
We'll do
voor
it
veel
live.
mensen een grote
Fuck it.
schok. Zij hadden tot dan toe de overtuiging gehad dat de mens in het centrum van de kosmos stond. En zij hadden daarop ook een gehele levensovertuiging gebouwd. En nu bleek dat ineens niet het geval te zijn. De theorie van Foucault kan men verduidelijken door vast te stellen dat hij eigenlijk met betrekking tot de cultuur een soort van Galilei standpunt inneemt. Immers met name sinds de tijd van Galilei heeft men eigenlijk, wat de cultuur betreft in de maatschappij, gedacht dat de mens daar wel in het centrum stond. Hij heeft ze tenslotte gemaakt. En Foucault ontkent dit. Niet het subject telt in de cultuur, zegt hij, maar de structuur, het algemene. Iets wat op zich al te begrijpen is, als men bedenkt dat de regels volgens welke men zich gedraagt voor verreweg het grootste deel al uitgevonden waren voordat men werd geboren. En dat de naam van de uitvinder ons volstrekt onbekend is.
Let's get to
nu kan men Foucault met Galilei vergelijken, maar in een ander opzicht kan men Chomsky ook met Galilei vergelijken, omdat hij in de taalwetenschap, de linguïstiek, zijn vak...
I don't know enough, guys. Is Chomsky, sorry, I know Chomsky does. Does Foucault delve, like, heavy into linguistics? Like, actual linguistic theory?
Een geweldige revolutionerende werking heeft gehad over de hele wereld. Chomsky heeft in de linguïstiek een waar...
I had a Marxist tell me that Weber is idealistic. I have no idea why this is occurring. It's odd. Yeah, Weber, some of his, there's a big subtext against sort of materialism as a way to describe, like, so say the superstructure, capitalism, or say the economic sort of position of wherever you live, like Germany, Europe, like at that time, it's capitalism. There, the Marxist theory is that ideology stems from that. Weber, obviously, is like, nope, sorry. But he doesn't outright say that, like, capitalism stemmed from ideology per se. Rather, I think Weber's trying to break down that dichotomy. He finds the pure materialist and material approach to understanding ideology, and where capitalism stems from is really dogmatic. And obviously, the spirit of capitalism being something that could be found in the Reformation and Protestantism, and people's belief therein. So, yeah, clearly that's not a pure materialist approach. But yeah, I find that really stupid. I find also, like, a lot of Marxists online, their idea of what idealism is like, that's like idealism when really they're like your politics are like bad or like something. It isn't. I don't know what the fuck half the time, but yeah, maybe he's using it accurately then. Maybe he actually knows what idealism and materialism is in the philosophical sense, ja.
Een omwenteling veroorzaakt. En het interessante is nu dat de theorieën van Chomsky in precies de tegenovergestelde richting wijzen als de theorieën van Foucault. Chomsky zet het subject veel meer in het centrum.
Let's get to the actual thing.
The Collège de France and Mr. Noam Chomsky of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Both philosophers have points in common and points of difference. Perhaps the best way to
I don't know much about this debate either, guys.
Is to look at them as
I know they talk about human nature, I suppose. I find the idea of human nature itself a little absurd,
with different
but
tools, without knowing even
we'll
if they
see.
are working in each other's direction.
Maybe there is a human nature. I'm not totally against that. I just think
man,
sometimes people's idea of what human nature is really funny. It's not human nature, I guess.
Are faced with the question whether in the last instance we are the product of all kinds of external factors, or if in spite of our differences we have something we could call a common human nature by which we can call each other human beings. So my first question is to Mr. Chomsky, because you, Mr. Chomsky, employ often the concept of human nature, and even in this connection you are using terms like innate ideas and innate structures. Which arguments can you derive from linguistics in order to give such a central position to this notion of human nature?
Well, let me begin in a slightly technical way. A person who's interested in studying language is faced with a very definite empirical problem. He's faced with an organism, a mature, let's say, adult
Yeah,
speaker,
Chomsky and Foucault are incredibly different in their approach. Chomsky is, I think, much more in line with like traditional Marxism in some way, at least in his political theory, but he's a linguist, you know.
To say what he means, to understand what people say to him, to do this in a fashion that I think it's proper to call highly creative. Now, the person who's acquired this intricate and highly articulated and organized collection of abilities, the collection of abilities that we call knowing a language, that person has been exposed to a certain experience. He has been presented in the course of his lifetime with a certain amount of data, of direct experience with the language. And we can investigate the data that's available to this person. And having done so, in principle, we're faced with a very clear and a reasonably clear and well-delineated scientific problem, namely the problem of accounting for the gap between the really quite small quantity of data, small and rather degenerate quantity of data that's presented to the person.
Foucault wants to stick the knife in so bad. I'm sure he does.
Systematic, profoundly organized, resulting knowledge that he somehow derives from this data.
I really like Chomsky a lot. I do. I do think Foucault is probably
wide range of languages. In fact, all that have been studied seriously.
I want to say like
remarkable limitations on the kinds of systems
perhaps?
that emerge.
Like he does a lot of things like kind of differently at this point, I suppose.
To which people are well, this.
I say that, but like Chomsky also did the same thing with linguistics, so it's really just two different fields, you know. I'm not. I think the whole versus thing is kind of cringe.
Phenomenon, namely the.
But I sort of I feel a little bit more inspiration from people like Foucault when I read them.
A good deal, an overwhelming part, in fact, of the general schematic structure and perhaps even of the specific content of the knowledge that he ultimately derives from this very scattered and limited experience. That is, to put it rather loosely,
I think Foucault had a lot of shit figured out, like a lot.
Not with the knowledge that he's hearing English or Dutch or French.
At least in like a
he does start with
like
the
in a
knowledge that
different lens, you know. That was all. Like I really don't understand some of the. Well, I do understand some of the antagonism against Foucault. It's really quite ideological and stupid. But even like I would say good faith criticism, I don't think it negates a lot of prior structuralist arguments around like power and capitalism. I don't. I think there is a very good place for understanding ideology within sort of religious and educational institutions and
is one fundamental constituent of human nature. But then I assume that in other domains of human intelligence and other domains of human cognition and even behavior, something of the same sort must be true. Well, the collection of this mass of innate schematism.
It is a shame.
Innate
a huge shame,
principles, which guides our social and intellectual and individual behavior. That's what I mean to refer to by the concept of human nature.
Okay.
Well,
that seems like a little bit more orthodox sort of
I got the impression
Marxist
that
position,
you are
maybe, or like neo-Marxist,
on
or
a completely different level, and also just with an opposite aim, opposite goal.
Whatever you want to call it.
If I'm thinking about the word schematism in relation to human nature, then you are just trying to work out that there are several periods, several schematisms. What do you think about this?
Well, if you permit, I will answer in French, because my English is so bad that I would be ashamed to answer in English. Là, il est vrai que je me méfie un peu de cette notion de nature humaine. Mais je m'en méfie pour la raison suivante. Je crois que parmi les concepts, parmi les notions dont une science peut se servir, il y a évidemment des notions qui sont d'un niveau, qui ont une élaboration, qui est une fonction différente. Par exemple, prenons le...
That's actually, Alex, it's kind of exactly what I was thinking. It actually just sort of sounds like a traditional sort of rationalist approach. I was kind of thinking that as well. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I maybe we'll see what Foucault says, but I think I'm probably a little bit more skeptical of that, but we'll see.
Dans le cas de la biologie, à l'intérieur, dans le domaine de la biologie, vous avez des concepts qui sont plus ou moins bien établis, comme le concept de réflexe. Bon. Et puis, vous avez d'autres notions qui sont en quelque sorte des notions périphériques. Des notions périphériques qui ne jouent pas un rôle en quelque sorte organisateur à l'intérieur de la science, des concepts qui ne sont pas des instruments d'analyse, des concepts qui ne sont pas descriptifs non plus. Ce sont des notions en quelque sorte qui servent simplement à indiquer des problèmes ou encore qui servent à indiquer des domaines d'objets à étudier. Prenez par exemple, il y a une notion comme ça qui, je crois, été très importante dans l'histoire de la biologie. C'est tout simplement la notion de vie. Bon, au XVIIe ou au XVIIIe siècle, les gens qui étudiaient la nature ne se servaient pas du concept de vie. Ils classaient les êtres naturels, qu'ils soient vivants ou non vivants, dans une espèce de grand tableau ou de grande hiérarchie. La vie était
I think Chomsky understands French. I'm pretty sure Chomsky, being a linguist, like speak a bunch of different languages.
Un certain nombre de problèmes se sont posés. Comme par exemple,
that's a good question. Chat, anyone in chat, if you could answer that. I don't know. I think, what? Was this 1973 or 4? I don't know. That's my guess. I don't know. That might be bad.
On a vu apparaître
wrong.
tout un tas de phénomènes qui n'avaient pas été jusque-là encore perçus et dont les mécanismes, dont le fonctionnement n'était pas encore clair. Les progrès de la chimie ont fait également apparaître les problèmes concernant les rapports entre les réactions chimiques et les processus physiologiques de l'organisme. Et voilà que tout un domaine d'objets est apparu, domaine d'objets absolument nouveau pour le biologiste, et c'est cela qui a été appelé la vie. Et la vie, c'était une notion qui servait à indiquer le champ des objets et des domaines nouveaux que la science avait à parcourir. Bon, et...
I feel like we're approaching too with Foucault. I don't know this. I'm not that well read on Foucault, guys. Like I'm really not. I don't know what Foucault's sort of like metaphysics are or is. I think he may not have a metaphysics, I suppose. But so my understanding is he's saying that there are certain sort of like functions within fields and study that are like deterministic in the way that we seek to apply them to something, and in that sense it creates its own self sort of like truth or validity, I suppose. So for something like human nature, we have to understand what human nature is to make sense of things, but we do that, you know. So they did live in a society. Amar, you're right.
La notion de vie a été un indicateur épistémologique, un index des problèmes à parcourir, et je me demande si on ne pourrait pas dire la même chose de la nature humaine.
Foucault vergelijkt dus het begrip menselijke natuur van Chomsky.
I like this. This is probably why this debate's so popular, is there's probably going to be like some like sort of clarification in between. That's cool. I've never seen that. But then again, they're talking about shit like no one even today is like would have any idea what the fuck's going on. So that's good.
Met het begrip leven.
Sorry.
Demande si on ne pourrait pas dire la même chose de la nature humaine.
I missed that.
Foucault vergelijkt dus het begrip menselijke natuur van Chomsky met het begrip leven in de biologie en in de geschiedenis van dat vak. En hij doet dat omdat hij dat begrip menselijke natuur eerder ziet als een aanwijzing voor een onderzoeksprogramma dan als een aanwijzing voor het feit dat de mens uit zichzelf...
Rather than as an indication of humanity's potential for achievement? Oh, okay, right. In conjunction to Chomsky's argument, I see.
Zelf zo verschrikkelijk veel klaar zou kunnen spelen. Voor hem is dat begrip menselijke natuur eigenlijk...
So yeah, of course this makes sense. Foucault has issue with sort of Chomsky's more humanistic approach.
Een soort van wetenschappelijk boodschappenlijstje en niet meer dan dat. En Chomsky wil dit wel accepteren als maar duidelijk is dat vakken als biologie, fysiologie en neurologie voorlopig nog helemaal niet over de middelen beschikken om die menselijke natuur en dat taalvermogen adequaat te kunnen beschrijven. Vrij vroeg is het debat zo aangeland op een punt waar het gespreksleider elders de grootste moeite zal kosten om de partners met elkaar in contact te houden. Voor een deel ligt het natuurlijk aan de taal die ze spreken, maar voor een veel groter deel ligt dat aan het feit dat Chomsky en Foucault ieder in een verschillende denkwereld zitten.
This is the weirdest debate ever.
Begrippen heel gemakkelijk langs elkaar heen glijden.
Yeah, this is the weirdest fucking debate ever. Chomsky and Foucault. I mean, the first time you hear this, you're like, this is fucking absurd. But then, like, you kind of just go about it. Until you start listening to it, you really understand how absurd this really is.
Eigenlijk het merkwaardige schouwspel te zien van twee breinen die gelijktijdig aan het denken zijn en om de beurt een begrip oppikken uit het betoog van de ander, om dit begrip dan vervolgens te belichten vanuit hun eigen denksysteem. Daarbij speelt dus voor Chomsky een grote rol dat begrip creativiteit, waarover nu een heel groot stuk van het debat zal gaan. Voor Chomsky is creativiteit eigenlijk een kenmerk van alle mensen. Iedereen werkt ermee. De verkeersdeelnemer die ter plaatse in een onverwachte situatie moet gaan bedenken wat hij zal doen. De opvoeder die niet terug wil vallen op autoritaire gedragspatronen en tegenover een lastige pupil zelf nieuw gedrag moet uitvinden. Maar vooral geldt deze creativiteit voor het kind dat een taal leert en dat daarbij merkwaardigerwijze leert om zelf nieuwe taal te produceren, te maken. Foucault staat daar tegenover. Hij vraagt voortdurend de aandacht voor het zogenoemde epistemologische veld waarbinnen de menselijke activiteit plaatsvindt. Dit epistemologische veld, oftewel episteme, wordt in het profiel omschreven als het geheel van niet bewuste regels die de algehele organisatie van onderling gescheiden velden van kennis beheert.
That's a kind of a question that I was curious about. Whether again, my reading of Foucault is not that deep. I'm curious to see where Foucault goes with sort of like the unconscious. That was always kind of a question that I had. Hey, David, thank you so much. Thank you for the $5, dude. Good to have you in here. Good to see you again, and thank you for the support, dude. It means a lot. So yeah, that was something like I'm not sure where sort of the post-structuralist viewpoint on the unconscious would work, but I suppose maybe he still yeah. I think that it's weird. I have a weird approach with philosophy and theory. I have sort of like an approach where I want to say like my approach is simply like interested in the history of ideas. I'm always trying to pin and compare and contrast certain ideas and positioning. That's how I approach it, but then again too, I come from sort of like a history background, I guess, and I suppose my mind's sort of like already there. So that's how I approach it. I don't really care about doing philosophy as so much as just kind of just trying to understand shit, I guess.
Yes.
I can't do philosophy, by the way. I suck at it.
Foucault spreekt ook over tableau. Hij noemt het ook systeem van elementen. En in het debat valt ook het woord grille, tralie of rooster. We kunnen misschien het best spreken van een netwerk.
Because you also can't forget Foucault had an entire critique of what knowledge is under the conditions of insanity being a phenomenon within our condition. Gotcha.
Waarbinnen iedereen in een bepaalde cultuur denkt of hij wil of niet. Het zijn eigenlijk regels waaraan het denken van iedereen gehoorzaamt en met behulp waarvan iedereen zoekt naar bepaalde identiteiten, samenhangen enzovoort.
I'm gonna go back just a little bit, guys. I think I missed that.
Van bij merkwaardigerwijze breinen die gelijktijdig aan het denken zijn en om de beurt waar het gespreksleider elders de grootste moeite zal kosten om de partners met elkaar in contact te houden. Ieder in een verschillende denkwereld zitten, zodat hun begrippen heel gemakkelijk langs elkaar heen glijden. We krijgen eigenlijk het merkwaardige schouwspel te zien van twee breinen die gelijktijdig aan het denken zijn en om de beurt een begrip oppikken uit het betoog van de ander, om dit begrip dan vervolgens te belichten vanuit hun eigen denksysteem. Daarbij speelt dus voor Chomsky een grote rol dat begrip creativiteit, waarover nu een heel groot stuk van het debat zal gaan. Voor Chomsky is creativiteit eigenlijk een kenmerk van alle mensen. Iedereen werkt ermee. De verkeersdeelnemer, die ter plaatse in een onverwachte situatie moet gaan bedenken wat hij zal doen. De opvoeder, die niet terug wil vallen op autoritaire gedragspatronen en tegenover een lastige pupil zelf nieuw gedrag moet uitvinden. Maar vooral geldt deze creativiteit voor het kind dat een taal leert en dat daarbij merkwaardigerwijze leert om zelf nieuwe taal te produceren, te maken. Foucault staat daar tegenover. Hij vraagt voortdurend de aandacht
Raphael,
voor het
this is
zogenoemde
Dutch.
epistemologische veld waarbinnen de menselijke activiteit plaatsvindt. Dit epistemologische veld, oftewel episteme, wordt in een profile omschreven als het geheel van niet bewuste regels die de algehele organisatie van onderling gescheiden velden van kennis beheersen. Foucault spreekt ook over tableau. Hij noemt het ook systeem van elementen. En in het debat valt ook het woord grille, tralie of rooster. We kunnen misschien het best spreken van een netwerk waarbinnen iedereen in een bepaalde cultuur denkt of hij wil of niet. Het zijn eigenlijk regels waaraan het denken van iedereen gehoorzaamt en met behulp waarvan iedereen zoekt naar bepaalde identiteiten, samenhangen enzovoort. En dit netwerk nu is niet de uitvinding van bepaalde individuen. Het bepaalt veel eer de regels van de denken- en doegewoonten, van het denken- en doespel dat we cultuur noemen en waaraan ieder individu eigenlijk onderhorig is. Een dergelijk netwerk is ook geen ding of idee, maar het ligt precies tussen ding en idee in. En de geschiedenis van het denken is dan voor Foucault ook niet de geschiedenis van ideeën, of zelfs zoiets als de ontwikkeling van de geest of iets dergelijks, maar veel eer de afwisseling van discontinue transformaties, van discontinue overgangen van het ene netwerk naar het andere. Dat is dus een heel andere aanzet dan die van Chomsky, bij wie die creativiteit in het centrum staat. En het is duidelijk dat we op dit punt bij Foucault weer diezelfde onttroning van het subject tegenkomen, waarover we in verband met Galilei in het begin reeds gesproken hebben. De filosofie van Foucault is een filosofie waarbij de filosoof zelf eigenlijk voortdurend uit het beeld verdwijnt. Ja, paradoxaal genoeg zou je moeten zeggen, het is eigenlijk een filosofie zonder filosoof. En je moet dit ook nog generaliseren, want de mens is bij Foucault in zekere zin de grote afwezige in zijn eigen cultuur. En het is in dit verband dan ook heel begrijpelijk dat Foucault nogal fel en afwijzend reageert wanneer de gespreksleider belangstelling begint te vertonen voor privé-aspecten van zijn bestaan. Wanneer Foucault debatteert, dan gaat het over alles, behalve over Foucault zelf. Dit dus ter introductie op dit volgende, vrij uitvoerige theoretische stuk van het debat, dat eigenlijk maar voortdurend allerlei aspecten van één hoofdvraag behandelt, en wel de vraag: in hoeverre is de mens in staat iets nieuws te ontdekken, en als dat zo is, hoe moeten we het dan begrijpen? Het lijkt mij een erg relevante vraag, zeker als we bedenken dat we nogal wat nieuwe vormen van gedrag, kennis en wetenschap nodig zullen hebben, willen we het er in onze wereld met elkaar levend afbrengen. We nemen nu de draad weer op, waar Foucault toelicht waarom hij aan de creativiteit van het individu in de geschiedenis niet zoveel aandacht besteedt.
Dans l'histoire traditionnelle des sciences, on accorde en effet le maximum, enfin la tradition veut qu'on accorde le maximum à la créativité des individus. L'histoire des sciences, jusqu'à ces dernières années, consistait essentiellement à montrer en quoi un individu, que ce soit Newton ou que ce soit Mendel, peu importe, avait été effectivement
I wish there was subtitles
le
built in.
créateur
Something about like
ou le
YouTube's subtitle system
découvreur
sucks. I
plutôt
don't know.
d'une vérité qui était là, inscrite dans les choses et dans le monde, et que personne avant eux n'aurait vu. Le postulat qu'il y a, je crois, qui dort en quelque sorte sous l'histoire des sciences traditionnelles, c'est ceci. C'est que la vérité est là pour être
Right,
connue,
truth exists in order
et
to
que,
be known in
pourtant,
itself. Yeah.
l'esprit de l'homme, par la suite, par l'effet d'un certain nombre d'inhibitions,
All right, comments are out of place here. I'll read chat a little bit here. Chomsky is 100% a system-approved asset. What the fuck does that? What that means? If I'm understanding you right, we all are, I guess. Fun fact: Foucault also had a psychology bachelor's. Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. It amazes me how much the comments are out of place. Okay. To Foucault, as in what is the author, the active subject is not the agent of generation of expansion, but rather of control, of filtration, a principle of thrift curb, and of free flows. Yep. That sounds right. I mean, everything here is just so radically way more post-human than like what Chomsky's about, but I mean, I guess that makes sense. He's a post-structuralist, and I guess Chomsky's not with that, I suppose. I'm not exactly sure why. I haven't ever seen really tangible good arguments against post-structuralism from people who want to remain in like a very coherent structural form. I guess Zizek sort of has a decent argument, but I'm talking about like other like people. I don't know.
Les vieux thèmes et mythes religieux, par exemple, ou moraux, enfin tout ceci qui constitue comme les obstacles, les écailles sur les yeux de celui qui voudrait voir. Mais en droit, l'esprit est fait pour voir. En droit, l'esprit est fait pour avoir accès à la vérité. Dans cette conception traditionnelle de l'histoire des sciences, d'une part, si vous voulez, on donne toute la créativité à l'individu, qui est en droit possesseur de la vérité, et puis on la lui retire par le système des obstacles qui viennent d'une façon tout à fait contingente l'empêcher de saisir, de formuler, de construire cette vérité à laquelle il a droit en principe. Bon. Alors, moi, le problème qui s'est posé à moi, c'était précisément un peu l'inverse. Parce que qu'est-ce qui se passe quand on assiste à une grande transformation scientifique? Dans une transformation scientifique, comme par exemple la naissance de la biologie au milieu du XVIIe siècle, ou la naissance de la philologie à la fin du XVIIIe, au début du XIXe. C'est vrai qu'un certain nombre d'obstacles, un certain nombre de préjugés, un certain nombre d'idées toutes faites tombent et viennent à disparaître. Mais ce qui m'a frappé, c'est qu'une science, au moment où elle naît, non seulement se débarrasse d'un certain nombre d'obstacles et d'obscurités, mais en même temps, elle supprime un certain nombre de savoirs et de connaissances existantes qu'elle occulte, qu'elle cache, comme si elle appliquait une grille nouvelle qui, tout en permettant de faire apparaître des phénomènes jusque-là cachés, cache des connaissances déjà acquises. Donc, une science, le progrès d'une science, l'acquisition d'une science, c'est pas simplement l'oubli des vieux préjugés, ce sont pas simplement les obstacles qui tombent, c'est une vérité.
The oblivion of old prejudices or the fall of a certain new obstacle is a new grid.
Nouvelle grille qui cache un certain nombre de choses et du coup fait apparaître. Donc,
I see.
Quand je critique la notion de créativité, je veux dire par là que, en fait, la vérité ne s'acquiert pas comme une sorte de création continue et cumulée, mais comme un jeu de grilles qui s'applique.
That's sort of like similar in some ways to Deleuze's rhizomatic viewpoint, or the rhizome, I think, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Les unes sur les autres cachées.
I think in part we're slightly talking in
it's also a question, not a statement.
Of a different use of the term creativity. In fact, I should say that my use of the term creativity is a little bit idiosyncratic, and therefore the onus falls on me.
There is a bit of Baudrillard in that, I suppose, but later Baudrillard was very post-structuralist, though. Yeah.
Attributing to the concept the notion of value that is normal when we speak of creativity. That is, when you speak of scientific creativity, you're speaking properly of the achievements of a Newton. But in the context in which I've been speaking about creativity, it's a normal human event. I'm speaking of the kind of creativity that any child demonstrates when he is able to come to grips with a new situation describe it properly, react to it properly, tell us something about it, think about it in a new fashion for him, and so on. These are, I think it's appropriate to call those creative acts, but of course without thinking of those acts as being the acts of a Newton. It's the lower levels of creativity that I've been speaking of. Now, as far as what you say about the history of science is concerned, I think that's correct and illuminating, and particularly relevant, in fact, to the kinds of enterprise that I see lying before us in psychology and linguistics and the philosophy of mind. That is, I think there are certain topics that have been, what was your word, depressed or put aside during the scientific advances of the, say, past 2 centuries, century and a half. But now I think we can overcome those, or it's possible to put aside those limitations and forgettings and to bring into our consideration precisely the topics that animated a good deal of the thinking and speculation of the 17th and 18th century, and to incorporate it within a much broader and I think deeper science of man that will give fuller role, though certainly not will not hope to give complete understanding to such notions as innovation and creativity and freedom and production of new new elements of thought and behavior within some system of rule and schematism. Those are concepts that I think we can come to grips with.
No, this is the entire debate.
Ce que dit M. Chomsky à l'instant et puis ce que j'essaie de montrer, il y a en réalité beaucoup de ressemblances, c'est-à-dire qu'il n'y a en fait de création possible, d'innovation possible. On ne peut, dans l'ordre du langage ou dans l'ordre du savoir, produire quelque chose de nouveau qu'en mettant en jeu un certain nombre de règles qui vont définir l'acceptabilité ou la grammaticalité des énoncés, ou qui va définir, dans le cas du savoir, la scientificité des énoncés. Alors, disons en gros que les linguistes, avant M. Chomsky, ont surtout insisté sur les règles de construction des énoncés et moins sur l'innovation que représente tout énoncé nouveau ou l'audition d'un énoncé nouveau. Et puis, dans l'histoire des sciences ou dans l'histoire de la pensée, on avait beaucoup plus l'habitude d'insister sur la création individuelle et on avait tenu à l'écart, on avait laissé dans l'ombre ces espèces de règles communes, générales, qui sont en œuvre obscurément à travers toute découverte scientifique, toute invention scientifique, ou même
Thank you so much, Laughing Man. I really appreciate that a lot.
Des règles non seulement
Appreciate the love, friend.
épistémologiques et qui caractérisent le savoir contemporain.
Well, I think perhaps I can try to react to those comments within my own framework in a way which maybe will shed some light on this. How is it that we're able to construct any kind of scientific theory at all? How is it that given a small amount of data, it's possible for various scientists, for various geniuses even over a long period of time, to arrive at some kind of a theory, at least in some cases, that is more or less profound and more or less empirically adequate? This is a remarkable fact. And in fact, if it were not the case that these scientists, including the geniuses, if they didn't have built into their minds somehow, obviously unconscious, specification of what is a possible scientific theory, then this inductive leap would certainly be quite impossible. Just as if each child did not have built into his mind the concept of human language in a very natural way, in a very narrowing way, then the inductive leap from data to knowledge of a language would be impossible. So even though the process of, let's say, deriving knowledge of physics from data is far more complex, far more difficult for us, for organisms such as us, far more drawn out in time, requires intervention of genius and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, in a certain sense, the achievement of discovering physical science, or biology or whatever you like, is based on something rather similar to the achievement of the normal child in discovering the structure of his language. That is, it must be achieved on the basis of an initial limitation an initial restriction on the class of possible theories. And the fact that science converges and progresses, that itself shows us that such initial limitations and structures exist. That is, I don't think that scientific progress is simply a matter of accumulative.
I feel like rather than, because I'm kind of confused, like replying to each other and what they're saying, they're just trying to elaborate on their position. they're just going into so many like different things that it's like impossible to directly like react to what the other person's saying. There might be like a language barrier there too, right? So they're having to communicate what was said afterwards, and then they have to sort of like, I don't know, it's not as organic as like a conversation. Okay. Rechat for a second. But yeah, Laughing Man, thank you so much for the $5, dude. Appreciate that a ton. I don't get the sense that Chomsky, who responds mainly by stacking vaguely relevant platitudes, gets what exactly Foucault was trying to get at. Yeah, I probably not. I'd imagine so too. Also, like, I think we've, 21st century people, we've had like longer to like think about what Foucault was saying. Foucault was saying what he was saying then was pretty new, obviously. Yeah, it's 2021, and I suppose that yeah, it's 2021, and still people don't really understand Foucault. So, hey,
this is one of
thank
the
you so
great
much.
moments in 20th century thought, when being a public intellectual was a real thing. It is great you are showing this.
M. Hampton, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you again for the $5. Yeah, it means a ton. Every little bit helps a lot. I'm a small channel, so that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think. Like, it's funny. I think people are like really antagonistic to the idea of like a quote unquote intellectual. And I don't like that. I think the idea of the intellectual isn't like bad per se. I suppose there's like a bit of a fetish on that. It can bring out sort of like an individual like egotistical like arrogance that would suck. But I think the sort of process in itself is like good, like I think that's the one thing that's only been able to grip my interest like for a long time. Or there's a couple things, I suppose. Creativity, art, and then like I suppose like the concept of like learning itself. Those are like the only things like in my mind that really sort of grasp my attention. So yeah, we certainly aren't, we're in a sort of post-intellectual age for sure. And part of that is our current, I think, economic arrangement, right? So today, like we are, as per like the individual goes within the 21st century. I want to say that like like especially in, I would say, most Western countries, and especially in America, the opportunity just quite isn't there. And then I also think there's probably some foundational educational like roadblocks. Like right now, I think some of the really interesting places are like quantum physics and stuff like that. Certainly there are things in philosophy. I think the quote unquote intellectual is definitely someone that deals heavy within a sort of meta of education rather than just one specific field. But I say that, like, for example, Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't just talk about fucking physics, right? People like want to hear his ideas about stuff. And he's got ideas about other stuff, whether how good or bad of an intellectual that he is. Same with Chomsky. He's a linguist, but he also deals with political theory and stuff like that. So, yeah. Yeah, I understand why someone would say that, but they're also talking. Yeah, I mean, this is like, I from what I'm understanding right now, like, I think it doesn't seem like a very organic interaction, but it's really like Chomsky really, it's a humanist viewpoint of human nature and I sort or history, and then really like Foucault is a very in the post-humanist camp. Yeah.
Addition of new knowledge and absorption of new theories and so on. Rather, I think it has this sort of
Ian mentions quantum physics. Mel shows up in chat. How's it going, Mel?
Jagged pattern that you describe, forgetting certain problems and leaping to new theories and so on and so forth.
Et transformant les mêmes connaissances.
Right. But I think that the explanation for that, so I think one can perhaps hazard an explanation for that fact. And oversimplifying grossly, I really don't mean what I'm now going to say literally. It's as if as human beings, a particular biologically given organism, we have in our heads, to start with, a certain set of possible intellectual structures, possible sciences. Okay? Now, in the lucky event that some aspect of reality happens to have the character of one of these structures in our mind, then we have a science. And it's because of this limitation, initial limitation in our minds to a certain kind of possible science, it's precisely that provides the tremendous richness and creativity of scientific knowledge. That is, if it were not, it's important to stress that. This has to do with your point about limitation and freedom. If it were not for these limitations, we would not have the creative act of going from a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of experience, to a rich and highly articulated and complicated array of knowledge. It's precisely because of that that the progress of science, I think, has the erratic and jagged and transformational character that you describe. And that doesn't mean that everything is ultimately going to fall within the domain of science. Quite the contrary. Personally, I believe that many of the things we would like to understand, and maybe the things we would most like to understand, such as the nature of man or the nature of a decent society or lots of other things, might really be outside.
Black Gunnar Lima, yeah, exactly, sort of the economic arrangement that I was talking to. It's maybe a good explanation is like post-Fordist economic model. Work is everywhere and work is everything. There is no distance. You don't work on a line anymore and then go home for 4 hours. Even then, education was hard, but we're at a point where it's like work is a 24/7 ordeal. The Fordist model is dead.
Le problème, alors là, que je me pose, et où je ne suis pas peut-être tout à fait d'accord avec M. Chomsky, c'est lorsqu'il place ces régularités à l'intérieur, en quelque sorte, de l'esprit ou de la nature humaine. Je me demande si le système de régularité, de contraintes qui rendent possible une science, on ne peut pas les trouver ailleurs, en dehors même de l'esprit humain.
Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but this is like, and I've always kind of thought about this with post-structuralism, this is sort of like the application of phenomenology in some sense, right? So I know things like even like negation has sort of been partitioned into structures or like language in the sort of post-structuralist tradition. I always kind of get the idea that this is sort of like the real like core application of phenomenology, right? Where there's like a sensory phenomena happening rather than something that's ontologically pure or like really actually happening in reality. But I don't know. It's all a process for me.
Formes sociales, dans des rapports de production, dans des luttes de classe, etc.
Mais quand même, qu'est-ce que la raison pour vous de parler de temps en temps de la mort de l'homme ou du fin de la période 19e, 20e siècle, n'est-ce pas?
Mais ça n'a pas de rapport avec ce que nous disons, là.
Je ne sais pas, parce que je pense à... quand je traite d'appliquer, qu'est-ce que vous avez dit, à votre notion anthropologique. Vous avez refusé déjà de parler sur votre propre créativité et liberté, n'est-ce pas? Alors, qu'est-ce qu'elle a raison? Quelles sont les raisons psychologiques, je me demande? Mais quelles sont peut-être...
c'est plus important. Vous le demandez, mais moi,
mais quelles sont les raisons, laissons-nous dire, plus objectives peut-être pour vous, votre conception de savoir, de la connaissance, de la science, pour refuser de répondre à des questions personnelles, n'est-ce pas? Ça a à faire quelque chose avec votre conception de la société. Alors, quand il y a un problème ici pour vous, qu'est-ce que sont les raisons?
He doesn't look very happy about that question.
Non, je ne fais pas du tout un problème d'une question personnelle. Je fais d'une question personnelle une absence de problème.
Make of a personal problem an absent.
Dire que dans toute l'histoire traditionnelle de la pensée, des idées et des sciences, on s'est
French
posé le
people,
problème
dude.
de savoir à quel âge Newton avait dû être sevré.
It gave me real like Lacan lecture energy.
À quelle époque est-ce que Cuvier avait rencontré sa première maîtresse
There is just an innate intensity with French people that you just, dude, us Anglos or Dutch fucking people, we can't match, man. It's just not going to happen.
Et je crois sans intérêt. Il est beaucoup plus intéressant de saisir les transformations d'un savoir en général à l'intérieur à la fois du domaine général des sciences et également de ce domaine en quelque sorte vertical que constitue une société, une culture, une civilisation à un moment donné. Et quand on saisit l'ensemble de la transformation, à ce moment-là, eh bien, on s'aperçoit que les petits événements individuels de la vie du savant...
The little individual moments of a wise. I figured that's exactly...
Opnieuw verdwijnt in deze laatste opmerking van Foucault het individuele leven van de geleerde onderzoeker uit het beeld. Maar hoe zit het dan met de verhouding van de mens tot zijn cultuur als het gaat over de politiek en misschien zelfs over de vraag hoe je die cultuur en die maatschappij kunt veranderen? Immers, men kan wel laten zien dat in de geschiedenis van de wetenschap en in de geschiedenis van de cultuur de inbreng van het individu een vrijwel te verwaarlozen rol speelt. De vraag, hoe moet ik handelen, de politieke vraag, blijft desalniettemin recht overeind staan. En het zal na het voorgaande misschien al duidelijk zijn dat die politieke vraag in het perspectief van Foucault heel sterk wordt tot de vraag: in hoeverre kan de mens ontsnappen aan zijn eigen cultuur? Daarbij is het wel van belang om op te merken dat Foucault zich helemaal niet wil distancieren van de politiek. Integendeel, hij zegt ergens: wat zou ik ideologisch verblind moeten zijn om me niet te interesseren voor datgene wat het meest wezenlijke is in het menselijk bestaan. Economische verhoudingen, machtsverhoudingen en noem maar op.
Wow, guys, real lib of Foucault.
Chomsky en Foucault zijn het...
I find that so funny because Foucault still comments on like economic superstructures and stuff, and for some weird reason there's like this small subset of like Marxists on the internet that fucking they think Foucault is like some like he doesn't think like economics doesn't exist or whatever. It's like the Jordan Peterson idea of what post-modernity or post-structuralism is. It's really stupid.
Wel eens over het belang van de politieke vraagstelling. Het is misschien ook wel informatief om nog eventjes uitdrukkelijk te zeggen dat Chomsky zijn politieke standpunt betitelt als anarcho-syndicalisme. Hij is van mening dat het noodzakelijk is de verschillende vormen van kapitalisme op te heffen en te doorbreken ten bate van de directe participatie van de arbeider in arbeidersraden enzovoort. Decentralisatie, socialisatie en participatie, het zijn sleutelwoorden in het politiek programma van Chomsky. Chomsky zegt weliswaar dat hij geen noodzakelijk verband ziet tussen zijn wetenschappelijke inzichten en zijn politieke, maar uit de nu volgende openingsset blijkt dat hij regelrecht vanuit zijn wetenschappelijke opvattingen afstevend op de politiek. Zijn politieke en wetenschappelijke inzichten mogen niet logisch uit elkaar voortvloeien, ze lopen wel degelijk parallel.
Well, let me begin by referring to something that I've already discussed. That is, if it is...
I'm wondering how much of like what Chomsky is saying here, because it's pretty firmly implanted with a lot of the more like classic humanist traditions of self and stuff. I'm curious to see how much that's shifted at all, or if it's shifted whatsoever. I know Chomsky is like very open to taking emails from people. I suppose I would be interested in talking to Noam Chomsky, but like I really like if you're gonna pester this poor guy, like you ought to have the right questions for him. And I guess that might be a good question. Maybe the relationship between linguistics and sort of political ideology, maybe. I don't know. If I ever get the chance, I ever have the opportunity and the privilege to talk to Noam Chomsky, at least in like the capacity of like Epoch philosophy, I promise I won't ask him about AOC or the Squad. That's or internet politics. I won't do that.
Correct, as I believe it is, that a fundamental element of human nature is the need for creative work, for creative inquiry, for free creation without the arbitrary limiting effects of coercive institutions. Then, of course, it will follow that a decent society should maximize the possibilities for this fundamental human characteristic.
I think there's if I'm understood right, like Chomsky saying that you know, like we should limit the institutional response to newer forms of human creativity and shit. That's all good. Like I think like it would be impossible. Like that's exactly where like I think any sort of left-wing emancipatory politics will sort of engage in its like put that at the core in some ways. I don't even know if I'm convinced though of like if that was a thing, like stuff would happen like we think we know what it would happen, right? Like you take away capitalism and we find the ability to sort of emancipate people from alienation. I don't think that's the case. But of course, like my politics still at the same time ironically reflects that to some degree. Like I don't think I've been able to escape quote unquote socialist politics. I would consider myself a socialist, or a communist, whatever. But yeah, I think that therein lies the sort of problem. Like Foucault would probably respond that like, I don't know. It doesn't mean alienation's going to go away. If anything, like it would probably just change the bounds in which we even approach or theorize what alienation is, I guess. I don't know.
To be realized. That means trying to overcome the elements of repression and oppression and destruction and coercion that exist in any existing society, ours, for example, as a historical residue. Now, a federated, decentralized system of free associations incorporating economic as well as social institutions would be what I refer to as anarcho-syndicalism, and it seems to me that it is the appropriate
I'm going to go back to see what he defines as anarcho-syndicalism, because I think in some ways I've heard him describe that as something different.
Exist in any existing society, ours, for example,
Ian,
as a historical residue.
I'm happy to see
now,
you succeed.
Federated...
Hey, I'll pause for this. Hey, how's it going, buddy? I hope you're doing well. I hope school's going well for you, despite COVID and stuff like that. Good to see you, man. I love your beard, by the way. Thank you. I grew it out. Good to have you in here, man. All right.
Decentralized.
Thank you so much, friend. I've thought about you lately as well. Guys, for context, just not to curtail the entire stream, I used to stream on Twitch, and Twitch being Twitch, it doesn't have, you know, like I had a couple people watch my streams, and Minnie was one of like 5.
Incorporating economic as
until
well
I switched to YouTube.
Would be what I refer to as anarcho-syndicalism,
okay.
And it seems to me that it is the appropriate form of social organization.
Okay, I suppose that's not too different from what he says today. My last understanding of what Chomsky thought by anarcho-syndicalism is just sort of a governmental mode or sociological order that sort of just meant to flatten out hierarchy. But that's sort of in some ways like the academic definition of anarchism in some respects. Like it's just really like the philosophy of flattening out hierarchy wherever you get. But yeah, that might be pretty, like, rough. That might be a rough understanding, so.
Il n'y a plus forte raison de proposer un modèle de fonctionnement social idéal pour notre société scientifique ou technologique. En revanche, une des tâches qui me paraît urgente, immédiate, avant même toute autre chose, c'est celle-ci. On a l'habitude, du moins dans notre société européenne, de considérer que le pouvoir, il est localisé entre les mains du gouvernement et il s'exerce par un certain nombre d'institutions bien particulières qui sont l'administration, en France on appelle ça préfectorale, enfin je ne sais pas comment on dit ailleurs, l'administration, la police, l'armée. On sait que toutes ces institutions-là sont faites pour transmettre les ordres, les faire appliquer et punir les gens qui n'obéissent pas. Mais je crois que le pouvoir politique, il s'exerce encore, il s'exerce en outre, de plus, par l'intermédiaire d'un certain nombre d'institutions qui ont l'air comme ça de n'avoir rien de commun avec le pouvoir politique, qui ont l'air d'en être indépendantes et qui ne le sont pas.
That sounds very reminiscent. Okay, I've always found quite a few similarities between Zizek and Foucault a little bit, and it might be the proximity to where like Lacan and Foucault might share some sort of ideas about things, but it's sort of ideology is at its most present, like in the Zizekian notion, like ideology is at its most present when it doesn't appear as ideology, right? And it's same with like power and institutions, I suppose. It's interesting.
On sait bien que l'université, d'une façon générale, tout le système scolaire, qui en apparence est fait simplement pour distribuer le savoir, on sait que cet appareil scolaire est fait pour maintenir au pouvoir une certaine classe sociale et exclure des instruments du pouvoir toute une autre classe sociale. Quelque chose comme la psychiatrie, qui en apparence aussi n'est destinée qu'au bien de l'humanité et à la connaissance des psychiatres, la psychiatrie est encore une certaine manière de faire peser un pouvoir politique sur un groupe social. La justice également. Bon, et il me semble que la tâche politique actuelle dans une société comme la nôtre, c'est de critiquer le jeu des institutions apparemment les plus neutres et les plus indépendantes, de les critiquer, de l'attaquer de telle manière que la violence politique qui s'exerçait obscurément en eux surgisse et pour qu'on puisse lutter contre elle. À vouloir tout de suite, enfin si on cherche tout de suite à donner le profil et la formule de la société future, sans avoir bien fait la critique de tous les rapports de violence politique qui s'exercent dans notre société, on risque de les laisser se reconstituer, même à travers des formes aussi nobles, apparemment aussi pures que celles du syndicalisme anarchiste.
Ah, I like that.
Yes,
interesting.
I
okay.
agree with that, not only in theory but also in action. That is, there are two intellectual tasks. One, and the one which I was discussing, to try to create the vision of a future just society. Another task is to understand very clearly the nature of power and oppression and terror and destruction in our own society. And that certainly includes the institutions you mentioned, as well as the central institutions of any industrial society, namely the economic, commercial, and financial institutions, in particular, in the coming period, the great multinational corporations, which are not very far from us physically tonight. Those are the basic institutions of oppression and coercion and autocratic rule that appear to be neutral. After all, they say, well, we're subject to the democracy of the marketplace. Still, I think it would be a great shame to lose or to put aside entirely the somewhat more abstract and philosophical, if you like, task of trying to draw the connections between a concept of human nature that gives full scope to freedom and dignity and creativity and other fundamental human characteristics, and relates that to some notion of social structure in which...
Is it me? I don't know. Is it me, or is like Chomsky? I feel like the main point Foucault was trying to make was that if we don't understand power or sort of political violence in certain new ways, we're bound to. And we try to change like ideology. We try to change the human organizations. We're bound to fall into some other new form of it, which I think that's probably like that's really accurate. Like you look at the 20th century and it's like pretty evident. I don't know. It's not like it may not necessarily be Chomsky's fault because there's like a language barrier, right? That's the thing that sucks about this. They can't like reply or ask questions. That's the thing. Like I don't know whether this is like a response to him or he's just trying to further elaborate his position. In my mind, if you want to respond or even, you know, if you want to respond to them, you'd have to ask questions to clarify things. And that's never happened at all. Foucault asked like one question. So I don't know. It just doesn't. I don't know. I'm just curious to see what he's kind of getting at. It seems like sometimes both will start like switching the topic and what they're trying to say, like, pretty quick?
Those properties could be realized in which meaningful human life could
Lucas
take place.
Flores, yes, I will. I will leave this
We
up
are
for you
thinking of
guys to
social
watch later.
transformation or
Absolutely.
social revolution, though it would be absurd, of course, to try to draw out in detail the point that we're hoping to reach. Still, we should know something about where we think we're going, and such a theory may tell it to us.
Oui, mais alors là, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas un danger? Si on dit que il existe une certaine nature humaine, que cette nature humaine n'a pas reçu dans la société actuelle les droits et les possibilités qui lui permettraient de se réaliser. C'est bien ce que vous avez dit, je crois. Et si on admet cela, est-ce qu'on ne risque pas de définir cette nature humaine à la fois idéale et réelle, cette nature humaine cachée et réprimée jusqu'à présent, est-ce qu'on ne risque pas de la définir dans des termes que nous empruntons à notre société, à notre civilisation, à notre culture? Je vais prendre un exemple qui est un peu caricatural, mais le marxisme d'une certaine époque, à la fin du 19e, au début du 20e siècle, le marxisme admettait en effet que dans la société capitaliste, l'homme ne recevait pas toutes ses possibilités de développement et de réalisation, que la nature humaine était effectivement aliénée dans le système capitaliste. Et le marxisme rêvait d'une nature humaine enfin libérée. Or, cette nature humaine, quel modèle utilisait-il le marxisme de cette époque-là, du 19e, du début du 20e siècle, quel modèle utilisait-il pour la concevoir, pour la rêver? C'était en réalité le modèle bourgeois. Le marxisme a considéré qu'une société heureuse, c'était une société qui faisait place, par exemple, à une sexualité de type bourgeois, à une famille de type bourgeois, à une esthétique de type bourgeois. Et c'est d'ailleurs tellement vrai que c'est comme ça que ça s'est passé en Union soviétique, où sous prétexte de réaliser une société où l'homme réaliserait enfin sa nature, on a reconstitué une espèce de société à la fois réelle et utopique qui est transposée de la société bourgeoise du XIXe siècle. De sorte que, est-ce que la notion de nature humaine, vous-même, en commençant, vous reconnaissiez, je crois qu'on ne savait pas très bien ce que c'était que cette nature.
Right, like, if I'm understanding him correctly, it's that, like, we still can't escape sort of, like, even the bourgeois model if we, you know, the bourgeois model of being, because it's so dependent on things outside of ourselves that, like, even if we emancipate ourselves from certain market structures and certain modes of alienation, things can ideologically flip, right? Like, and it's the same, and this would make sense. I think someone pointed out in chat that, like, Foucault found himself in a more of a sort of anarchic sort of political position. That would make sense, right? Because at least one thing I think we can think of is that, or there's an argument to be made that, especially within countries like the USSR, if anything, there was just, it exposed sort of larger ideological modes of alienation, right? Alienation perhaps could be extended out further than just through the labor process and the division of labor within capitalism, right? It's not as simple as emancipating people from workers from capitalists, and that in many ways the new mode of ideology in the USSR was also still the same bourgeois model, just with a different bureaucratic paint. Yeah. This is why I believe Foucault went anarchic later part in his life. Yeah, nice expression. Marxists try to claim Foucault, but the issue for Foucault is he did not believe in historical progress or historical materialism. Right. Well, I believe industrial society is better than what came before it. What Foucault is saying shows very superficial familiarity with Soviet history. Wait. I'm confused. I mean, like, okay. So I don't want to necessarily curtail the discussion away from the debate. I don't buy the idea that the USSR was a super successful emancipatory project at breaking people away from sort of breaking people away from alienation or like woes associated within capitalism. I think that a lot of the woes that you found within capitalism in the labor process was still found in the USSR, which is precisely, I think, the point that Foucault is trying to make, that like if we don't understand relations in a new way, those relations are bound to repeat itself again, because again, the foundation isn't as simple as, you know, like we need to have a pure sort of ideological answer like anarcho-syndicalism, socialism, Marxism, so be it. I'm a Marxist, but I'll take a class on Foucault. Yeah, the 1920s. Well, it's not like a when you. I think the important thing when we're talking about the Soviet Union, right, and socialist projects going forward, it's not as simple. Like you can't make value judgments on that, right? Like it's super like, or it's very difficult to, and like of course, like that's all the discourse is on like, you know, existing socialism or those sort of projects in the 20th century. It's all just like laden with just value judgments everywhere, and like value judgments that are really based on super ideological ideals that are clearly, I don't know. I think it's pretty I think it's pretty arrogant and dumb. But yeah, it's not necessarily to make a value judgment. I think it's like it's pretty self-evident that it's like it. I don't think I say it's self-evident, but I don't think so. I think there are a lot of very smart people that may say otherwise. I don't think the USSR succeeded in its like total goal. There was good things that happened. Some pretty bad things that happened, but I think we'd be severely mistaken if we thought that like if say the goal was socialism or human emancipation. I don't think it succeeded in that realm. Like it's same with China, same with a lot of in the Balkan states, right? But it's not to make a value judgment on that, right? It's not to say that like it's fucking, you know, like it was bad that they did that. If anything, they offered us, I think, like if we want to understand history, I think they offered us a gift in potentially understanding new things, but I guess that's me. We'll get back to the debate though.
Alors, est-ce qu'il ne risque pas de nous induire en erreur? Vous savez que Mao Tse-tung parlait de nature humaine bourgeoise et de nature humaine prolétarienne, et il considère que ce n'est pas la même chose.
Well, you see, I think that in the intellectual domain of political action, that is, the domain of trying to construct a vision of a just and free society on the basis of some notion of human nature, in that domain we face the very same problem that we face in
whether it was bound to repeat, I agree. There is no way to guarantee that. Yeah.
A lot of my own activity really has
to say that it is bound to quote unquote repeat. That might be short-sighted, but
civil disobedience,
I think it's very likely though.
In the United States, is an action undertaken in the face of considerable uncertainties about its effects. For example, it threatens the social order in ways which, let's say, one might argue, bring on fascism. That would be very bad for America, for Vietnam, for Holland, and for everyone else. So there's a danger, that is one danger in undertaking this concrete act. On the other hand, there's a great danger in not undertaking it. Namely, if you don't undertake it, the society of Indochina will be torn to shreds by American power. And in the face of those uncertainties, one has to choose a course of action. Well, similarly, in the intellectual domain, one is faced with the uncertainties that you correctly pose. Our concept of human nature is certainly limited, partial, socially conditioned, constrained by our own character defects and the limitations of the intellectual culture in which we exist. Yet at the same time, it's of critical importance that we have some direction, that we know what impossible goals we're trying to achieve if we hope to achieve some of the possible goals. And that means that we have to be bold enough to speculate and create social theories on the basis of partial knowledge while remaining very open to the strong possibility, in fact overwhelming probability, that at least in some respects we're very far off the mark.
Well, perhaps it is interesting to go on a little bit further on this problem of strategy. So, for example, in the case of Holland, we had something like a population census. You were obliged to fill in your papers and so on, you know. So this you would call, if you are not filling in your papers, civil disobedience.
Right. Now, I would be a little careful about that because going back to some very important point that Mr. Foucault made, one does not necessarily allow the state to define what is legal. Now, the state has the power to enforce a certain concept of what is legal, but power doesn't imply justice or correctness even. So the state may define something as civil disobedience and may be wrong in doing so. For example, in the United States, the state defines it as civil disobedience to, let's say, derail an ammunition train that's going to Vietnam. And the state is wrong in defining that as civil disobedience because it's legal and proper and should be done. It's proper to carry out actions that will prevent the criminal acts of the state, just as it's proper to violate a traffic ordinance in order to prevent a murder. If I was standing at a street corner and the traffic light were red, let's say I was standing in my car and I drove across the traffic light to prevent somebody from, let's say, machine gunning a group of people, of course that's not violation of law. It's an appropriate and proper action. No sane judge would convict you for such an action. Similarly, a good deal of what the state authorities define as civil disobedience is not really civil disobedience. In fact, it's legal, in fact, obligatory behavior in violation of the commands of the state, which may or may not be legal commands. So one has to be rather careful about calling things illegal, I think.
Oui, mais alors là, je voudrais vous poser une question. Quand vous êtes aux États-Unis, lorsque vous faites une action franchement illégale,
which I regard as illegal, not just the state.
No, when the state's an
But the
action
state
that
regards
the
as illegal.
state considers as illegal.
Yeah.
Est-ce que vous faites cette action parce que vous la trouvez
I understand.
juste
Yeah.
en vertu d'une justice idéale, ou bien est-ce que vous la faites parce que
Yeah.
la guerre de classe
Yes.
la rend utile et nécessaire?
Well,
Est-ce que vous vous référez à une justice idéale? Voilà
again,
mon problème.
very often when I do something which the state regards as illegal, I regard it as legal.
Yes, that's
Because
it.
I regard the state as criminal.
Alors,
But in some instances, that's not true. That is, let me be quite concrete about it and move from the area of class war to imperialist war, where the situation is somewhat clearer and easier. Take international law, a very weak instrument as we know, but nevertheless it incorporates some rather interesting principles. Well, international law in many respects is the instrument of the powerful. That is, international law permits much too wide a range of international forceful intervention in support of existing power structures that define themselves as states and against the interests of masses of people who happen to be organized in opposition to states. But, in fact, international law is not solely of that kind. And in fact, there are interesting elements of international law, let's say embedded in the United Nations Charter, which permit, in fact, I believe, require the citizen to act against his own state in ways that the state will falsely regard as criminal. But nevertheless, he's acting legally, because international law also
yeah, I don't know why that camera panned to his face
threat
like
or
that.
use of force in international affairs, except under some very narrow circumstances, of which, for example, the war in Vietnam is not one, which means that in the particular case of, let's say, the Vietnam War, the one that interests me most, the American state is acting in a criminal capacity, and people have the right to stop criminals from murdering people. Just because the criminal happens to call you your action illegal.
He looks like he's struggling.
It is illegal. I mean, a perfectly clear case of that is the present case of
I don't really have a problem too much with what
United States,
Chomsky's saying, but
no.
I just think that's funny.
Reduced to its essentials and forgetting legalisms, what is happening is that the state is trying to prosecute people for exposing its crimes. That's what it amounts to.
C'est donc au nom d'une justice plus pure que vous critiquez le fonctionnement de la justice. Parce que c'est pour moi, si vous voulez, important de savoir ça, parce que nous avons actuellement en France un débat sur le problème de la justice et à propos de l'institution d'un tribunal populaire à propos de la justice. Vous connaissez le problème des... Et un certain nombre de gens, comme Sartre par exemple, pensent que pour faire actuellement la critique du système pénal en France, ou pour faire la critique de des pratiques policières, de la manière dont la police se conduit, il faut faire une sorte de tribunal qui, au nom d'une justice idéale, d'une justice supérieure, d'une justice humaine en général, condamnera la pratique des juges français ou des policiers français. Et puis, il y a un autre groupe de gens, et je me sens, enfin, je travaille avec ces gens-là, qui disent non, il ne faut pas faire cela parce que quand vous vous référez à la justice idéale que le tribunal serait censé appliquer, vous vous référez en fait à un certain nombre d'idées de justice qui ont été formées à notre époque par un certain groupe d'individus qui sont eux-mêmes, malgré tout, d'une façon directe ou indirecte, les produits de la société dans laquelle nous nous trouvons. Il faut attaquer les pratiques de la justice, il faut attaquer la police, il faut attaquer les pratiques policières, mais en termes de guerre et non pas en termes de justice.
But you see,
I see what he's saying. Rather than just an ideal itself, right? Or at least adhering to some sort of like structural ideal of justice itself. I see. Okay. Read some chat. Chomsky is very liberal here. Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, yeah, there is a sort of a very yeah, I would agree. It's funny how like people call Foucault a liberal. It's like, especially maybe in conjunction. I mean, some people also call Chomsky a liberal too. I think that's accurate. I don't think it's quite as accurate with Foucault, but yeah, no, I think there is yeah, I mean, absolutely Chomsky falls under this sort of, I think, liberal philosophy of the, I don't know, he's just a very, very, I want to say he's a humanist in the flesh, I suppose, and that's okay, you know, like, I like Chomsky. I'm not gonna go on fucking Twitter and bitch about it.
Surely you believe that your role in the war is a just role, that you're fighting a just war, to bring in a concept from another
right
domain.
The concept of action
and
itself,
that,
yeah,
I think is important. If you thought that you were fighting an unjust war, you couldn't follow that line of reasoning. And the only, see, I would like to slightly reformulate what you said. It doesn't seem to me that the difference is between legality and ideal justice. It's rather between legality and better justice. Now, this better system may have its defects, certainly will, but comparing the better system with the existing system and not being confused into thinking that our better system is the ideal system, we can then argue, I think, as follows, that the concept of legality and the concept of justice are not identical. They're not entirely distinct either. Insofar as legality incorporates justice in this notion, in this sense of better justice, referring to a better society, then we should follow and obey the law. And
yeah, I agree. Chomsky does have a Rawlsian. I think that's. I never thought about Chomsky in that light. I don't know why, but yeah, it has sort of a Rawlsian tonality to him, especially like with this.
In those areas where the legal system happens to represent not better justice, but rather the techniques of oppression that have been codified in a particular autocratic system, well, then a reasonable human being should disregard and oppose them, at least in principle. He may not, for some reason, do it in fact.
Let's go back to that beautiful man.
For some reason, do it in fact. It happens to represent not better justice, but rather the techniques of oppression that have been codified in a particular autocratic system. Well,
that's me!
A reasonable human being
me listening to Chomsky and Foucault.
He may not, for some reason, do it in fact.
Je voulais simplement répondre à votre toute première phrase quand vous avez dit « Mais la guerre que vous faites contre la police, si vous ne considériez pas qu'elle est juste, vous ne la feriez pas. » Alors, je vous réponds.
I would like to reply to you in terms of Spinoza. Say that to any normal fucking human being ever. I don't know why. I just imagine going up to someone who's like, you know what, Spinoza? It's like, let me reply in terms of Spinoza. I don't know why that cracks my shit up. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I don't agree.
On fait la guerre pour gagner, et pas parce qu'elle est juste.
I don't personally agree with that. For example, if I could convince myself that attainment of power by the proletariat would...
I'm going to go back, guys, if you don't mind. I apologize.
I don't personally agree with that.
We're going to go back to Spinoza.
À votre toute première phrase, quand vous avez dit, mais la guerre que vous...
The techniques of the law, and force the great corporations to obey the law, and force the police to obey the law, if we have the power to do so. Of course, final, if in those areas where the legal system happens to represent not better justice, but rather the techniques of oppression that have been codified in a particular autocratic system,
okay.
Well, then...
There's our guy.
...and oppose them, at least in principle. He may not, for some reason, do it in fact.
Alors, je voulais simplement répondre à votre toute première phrase.
Here we go.
Quand vous
Sorry,
avez
guys.
dit, mais la guerre que vous faites contre la police, si vous ne considériez pas qu'elle est juste...
I would like to reply to you in terms of Spinoza.
Un peu en termes de Spinoza, je vous dirais, le prolétariat ne fait pas la guerre à la classe dirigeante parce qu'il considère que cette guerre est juste. Le prolétariat fait la guerre à la classe dirigeante parce qu'il veut, pour la première fois dans l'histoire, prendre le pouvoir. Et c'est parce qu'il veut prendre le pouvoir qu'il considère...
Huh. Okay. Interesting. Maybe help me out here. I don't know if I understand what he means by that. They don't overthrow... We're going to go back. I apologize. We are at 56:27.
Si vous ne considériez pas qu'elle est juste, vous ne la feriez pas. Alors, je vous répondrai...
I don't understand that completely.
Je vous dirai, le prolétariat ne fait pas la guerre à la classe dirigeante parce qu'il considère que cette guerre est juste. Le prolétariat fait la guerre à la classe dirigeante parce qu'il veut, pour la première fois dans l'histoire, prendre le pouvoir. Et c'est parce qu'il veut prendre le pouvoir qu'il considère que sa guerre est juste.
Yeah,
I see.
La guerre pour gagner, et pas parce qu'elle est juste.
I don't personally agree with that. For example, if I could convince myself that attainment of power by the proletariat would lead to a...
Oh, yeah, it's not a matter of fairness.
In which freedom and dignity... And
right, it's the actual, like, will itself rather than, like... rather than an ideal of fairness. I see. Thank you. I don't know why that didn't click in my head. Okay.
One thinks, rightly or wrongly, that some fundamental human values
Sorry,
will
that
be
makes
achieved
perfect
by
sense.
that
I don't know why.
power.
Alors, je vous répondrai ceci.
I don't see power and ideology or sort of ideals as something inherently, like, separate maybe, but I don't know.
Que le prolétariat
I'm kind of an idiot, so I don't know.
Des classes dont il vient de triompher, il exerce un pouvoir violent, dictatorial et même sanglant. Je ne vois pas quelle objection on peut faire à cela. Maintenant, vous me direz, et si le prolétariat exerce ce pouvoir sanglant, tyrannique et injuste à l'égard de lui-même, le prolétariat? Alors je vous répondrai, ça ne peut se produire que si le prolétariat n'a pas réellement pris le pouvoir, mais c'est qu'une classe extérieure au prolétariat, ou un groupe de gens intérieurs au prolétariat, une bureaucratie ou les restes de la petite bourgeoisie, etc., s'est emparé du pouvoir.
Well, I'm not at all satisfied with that theory of revolution for a lot of reasons, historical and other. But even if one were to accept it for the sake of argument, still that theory is maintaining that it is proper for the proletariat to take power and exercise it in a violent and bloody and unjust fashion because it is claimed, in my opinion falsely, that will lead to a more just society in which the state will wither away, in which the proletariat will be a universal class, and so on and so forth. If it weren't for that further justification, the concept of a dictatorship of the proletariat, violent and bloody, would certainly be unjust. At least I, for example, am not a...
Oh, I see his point. I don't disagree with that. Right? There has to be a sort of ideal behind power, I suppose, and he uses that with the dictatorship of the proletariat. Like, there's probably like an inherent contradiction with the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat, right? Like, it's inherently violent and bloody. It's also sort of like, at least our modern notion, there's debate with German linguists about what not debate really. Actually, German linguists will say that, like, Marx and Engels essentially meant that the dictatorship of the proletariat really didn't mean an actual dictatorship, but like authority, blah, 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 whatever. Nonetheless, like, governing dictatorship, that seems kind of antithetical on the surface to, like, quote unquote socialism. So, but in order to do that, there has to be a justification of an ideal behind that, rather than just a mere power. I don't think I disagree with that. Okay. Yeah, there has to be an ideological justification, like justice or reason. Okay. But then I suppose, like, again, like Foucault, like you guys said, he's a Nietzschean. There's even in the end, it doesn't matter because materially, like it's in the act of doing itself that I suppose is like is of importance. So I don't know. I'm stuck between liberal brain of like humanism and then like post-human like determinism. I don't fucking know. Determinism. I don't know. I see.
Committed pacifist. That is, I would not hold that it is under all imaginable circumstances wrong to use violence, even though use of violence is in some sense unjust. I believe that one has to estimate relative injustices. But the use of violence and the creation of some degree of injustice can only itself be justified on the basis of the claim and the assessment, which always ought to be undertaken very, very seriously and with a good deal of skepticism, that this violence is being exercised because a more just result is going to be achieved. If it does not have that grounding, it really is totally immoral, in my opinion.
Je ne pense pas que l'idéal de la guerre de classe, enfin le but que se propose le prolétariat en menant la guerre de classe, je ne crois pas qu'on puisse dire, enfin qu'il soit suffisant de dire que c'est une plus grande justice. Ce que le prolétariat veut faire en chassant la classe actuellement au pouvoir et en prenant pour lui le pouvoir, c'est la suppression précisément d'un pouvoir de classe en général.
Okay.
Car le prolétariat...
That's the further justification.
Hein?
That is the further justification.
Ça c'est la justification, mais pas en termes de justice, en termes de pouvoir.
But it is in terms of justice. It's because the end that will be achieved, it is claimed, is a just end.
If someone wants to help me, perhaps, like... I don't know. I actually think I agree with Chomsky here. Like, I don't... Like... I grant the individual a little bit more agency maybe than I think what Foucault is saying. It's just in terms of power. I don't know if I'd say that. I don't know. I think I see what Chomsky's saying, that's still in a sense a sort of justification that still comes to the individual to some extent. We can debate the extent of that. I wouldn't want to, but I do see. I don't know. I think I do sort of agree with Chomsky in this regard, but yeah.
No, Leninist or whatever you like would dare to say we have a right to take power, let's say we, the proletariat, and then throw everyone else into crematoria, let's say. I mean, if that were the consequence of the proletariat taking
if I'm understanding
power,
Foucault's concept of power, I suppose.
The idea
but,
is,
yeah.
and as for reasons I mentioned, I'm skeptical about it, that a period of violent dictatorship, of perhaps violent and bloody dictatorship, is justified because that will mean the submergence and termination of class oppression, a proper end to achieve in human life.
Mais il me semble que de toute façon, la notion même de justice fonctionne à l'intérieur de la société de classe comme revendication du côté de la classe opprimée et comme justification du côté de la classe oppressée.
I don't agree with that.
Et dans une société...
Sorry, I don't know what he doesn't agree with. We're going to go back real quick. Sorry.
Termination of class oppression.
Okay.
A proper end to achieve.
Let's hear Foucault's
Mais
response.
il me semble que de toute façon, la notion même de justice fonctionne à l'intérieur de la société de classe comme revendication du côté de la classe opprimée et comme justification du côté de la classe oppressée.
I don't agree with that.
Et dans une société sans classe, je ne suis pas sûr qu'on ait encore à utiliser cette notion de justice.
Yeah. Well, here I really disagree. I think that there is a sort of an absolute basis. If you press me too hard, I'll be in trouble because I can't sketch it out. But some sort of an absolute basis ultimately residing in fundamental human qualities in terms of which a real notion of justice is grounded. And I think that our existing systems of justice I think it's too hasty to characterize our existing systems of justice as merely systems of class oppression. I don't think that they are that. I think that they embody systems of class oppression, and they embody elements of other kinds of oppression. But they also embody a kind of a groping towards the true humanly valuable concept of justice and decency and love and kindness and sympathy and so on, which I think are real.
Bon, est-ce que j'ai du temps pour répondre?
Oui,
Combien? Parce que...
2 minutes.
Ben, moi, je dirais que c'est injuste.
Absolutely.
Non, mais bon, je ne veux pas répondre en si peu de temps. Je dirais simplement ceci. Je ne peux pas m'empêcher, contrairement à ce que vous pensez, je ne peux pas m'empêcher de croire que cette notion de nature humaine, cette notion de bonté, de justice, d'essence humaine, de réalisation de l'essence humaine, tout ça, ce sont des notions et des concepts qui ont été formés à l'intérieur de notre civilisation, dans notre type de savoir, dans notre forme de philosophie, et que par conséquent, ça fait partie même de notre système de classe, et qu'on ne peut pas, aussi regrettable que ce soit, on ne peut pas faire valoir ces notions pour décrire ou justifier un combat qui doit en principe bouleverser les fondements mêmes de notre société. Il y a là une extrapolation dont je n'arrive pas à trouver la justification historique.
Well, I think we can start immediately the discussion. And
Mr. Chomsky, I would ask you one question. In your discussion, you had the vocabulary proletariat. We, as proletarian, it's the irony of history that at the moment, young intellectuals coming from middle class and upper class call themselves proletarians and say we must join the proletarians. But I don't see any class-conscious proletarians. That's a great dilemma.
It is not true in our...
Even in the 70s, huh?
That all people
Imagine what he would think today.
Work or self-satisfying work. Obviously, it's very far from true. Those people. Lots of people who are excluded from the possibility of productive labor. And I think the revolution, if you want, should be in the name of all human beings. But it will have to be conducted by certain categories of human beings, and those will be, I think, the human beings who really are involved in the productive work of society. Now, what that is will differ depending on the society. In our society, it, I think, includes intellectual workers. So I think that the student revolutionaries, if you like, have a point, a partial point. That is, it's a very important thing in a modern, advanced industrial society. It's very important how the trained intelligentsia identify themselves. if they're going to be technocrats, let's say, or servants of either the state or private power, or alternatively, whether they're going to identify themselves as part of the workforce who happen to be doing intellectual labor. If the latter, then they can and should play a decent role in a progressive social revolution. If the former, then they're part of the class of the oppressors.
I have an additional, one small additional question or more remark to you. That is that you, with your very courageous attitude towards the war in Vietnam, how can you survive in an institution like MIT, which is known here as one of the great war contractors and intellectual makers of this war?
There are two aspects to that. One is the question how MIT tolerates me, and the other question is how I tolerate MIT. Well, as to how MIT tolerates me, here again I think one shouldn't be overly schematic. It's true that MIT is a major...
The student revolutionaries became neoliberals.
But it's also
in some ways,
it
yeah.
embodies very important libertarian values, which are, I think, quite deeply embedded in American society, fortunately for the world. They're not deeply embedded enough to save the Vietnamese, but they're deeply enough embedded to prevent far worse disasters. And here I think one has to be a bit qualified.
I don't know if he'd stand by that statement today.
That is, there is imperial terror and aggression. There is exploitation. There is racism. Lots of things like that. But there's also a real concern coexisting with it for individual rights of a sort which, for example, are embodied in the Bill of Rights, which is by no means simply an expression of class oppression. It is also an expression of the necessity to defend the individual against state power. Now, these things coexist, you know. It's not that simple. It's not just all bad or all good. And it's because it's the particular balance in which they coexist that makes it, that makes an institute that produces weapons of war be
Berserker, it is pretty crazy.
In fact, you know, in many ways even encouraged.
I don't think rhetoric itself changes much at all, or has changed probably in a while.
MIT, that raises another question.
In a while, I mean like in like
the logic of this, that
centuries, century or centuries, right?
Institutions. That is, the logic of that argument is that Karl Marx shouldn't have studied in the British Museum, which, if anything, was the symbol of, you know, the most vicious imperialism in the world, the place where all the treasures of empire were gathered, you know, the rape of the colonies was all poured in there, and so on and so forth. But I think Karl Marx was quite right in studying in the British Museum. He was right in using the resources and, in fact, the liberal values of the civilization that he was trying to overcome against it.
Proper Hegelian Karl Marx.
The same applies in this case.
But aren't you afraid that your presence at MIT gives them a clean conscience?
I don't see how, really. I mean, I think my presence at MIT serves marginally to, I hope a lot, I don't know how much, to increase student activism against a lot of the things that MIT stands for example.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think this has to be the end of the debate. Mr. Chomsky, Mr. Foucault, I thank you very much for your far-going discussion, both the technical, theoretical way as the political way.
All right.
I thank you very much, both at the part of the audience here and at home.
Please clap. Cool. All right. So we did it, guys. We made it through the entire Chomsky-Foucault debate. All right. So I'm curious. I guess I can now take maybe some questions, or rather, I can listen to you guys. That's how a lot of my streams are usually. It's usually me talking to you guys. So yeah. I don't know. I mean, okay. So clearly, it was a discussion on human nature. It was a discussion on probably human agency within larger systems. What it means. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess that's it. Talk about the most broad thing to debate about, you know? Dude, shout me out from Morocco. Hello, it's 3 a.m. here. Figure us. Well, shout it out to you are now. Congratulations. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think so if I okay, I think if anything, Chomsky, not to his fault, probably nowadays it'd probably be more proven, perhaps incorrectly, quote unquote, maybe about sort of the rational justification for things. I do so I think I probably agree with him that yeah, there is still it's I wouldn't say it's just power, right? Perhaps in writing, Foucault doesn't necessarily mean that either, right? That's a pretty simplistic view, guys, if you think about it. That sort of it is in relation with power itself that humans act in the way, you know, like he was saying within Revolution. I don't think that's right. And then Foucault, or not Foucault, Chomsky was trying to reiterate that no, there is a sort of rational justification. I don't know. It's a simpleton kind of fucking reply, but probably both. Probably both. That's all that I can think. But I think as far as history goes, I think Foucault's probably, I think he's got it. And I think that most of these sort of ideals are very rigidly structured on society, which is ironic though, right? Do you guys not catch the irony there? Maybe I'm on the internet too much. This is my job. I have to do that. It's funny that that's in many ways a sort of very Marxist analysis. Perhaps when we're speaking about ideology, it's more of a neo-Marxist analysis, which that's, according to some people, that's fucking lib shit, dude. Like Adorno, Horkheimer, fuck them. Like that's lib shit. But like nonetheless, like that's, in my mind, like that's the whole point. Like these ideas stem from superstructures, and that's seriously like this entire debate. That's kind of like what Foucault was talking about. So I don't know. I found that kind of ironic. I've never seen the debate. Yeah. This is my first time catching a stream. Pretty good stuff. Thank you. Well, thank you for being here, Berserker. Not much philosophy. I mean, there was. I can't say that wasn't like philosophy, but yeah. Do you play your synths? Nah, I just bought my synths and I just sit there. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, of course I do. On stream, you mean? I have before, but yeah. I have so much to learn, but this was nice. Me too, friend. Me too. You are not alone. This whole thing is it's a process. It's a journey. I don't. One thing that I struggle with is speaking in confidence sometimes about things. Like ironically, that's kind of what I saw with Foucault too. Like they're like, what are your reasonings, or this and this and that. I get his reluctance to sort of speak on himself as sort of like an individual. I have this, I don't know, like what can you say, you know? It's always something that it's a process. You learn. Yeah. Good material to get acquainted with. It was very nice to see the debate with more people who enjoy philosophy. Yeah. So, yeah, I thought that was a lot of fun, guys. We can probably, I think we can start doing a little bit more applied streams, right? So more structured. We can view some content, stuff like that. Guys, feel free to shoot me some ideas, though. I would need ideas. This wouldn't have happened if it didn't come from people who didn't tell me to maybe watch this on stream. I wouldn't have thought to do this, and I thought it was a good idea, and I thought it was fun. And I get, it's a very famous debate. I guess it's kind of cool. I watched the whole thing. I understand what it was about. I didn't think it was very good. They were talking past each other. I thought it was kind of I don't know. It was a very rhetorical debate, maybe, but yeah, I guess it was kind of cool nonetheless. I know there are some sort of small indie documentaries. There was one about Badiou that I thought looked cool, but I haven't read Badiou, so that might be a mistake to watch a documentary about Badiou while not reading him. Maybe, I think that'd probably be a mistake, but maybe not, because you guys, some of you maybe have not read Badiou, and so maybe me not reading him might help us grapple it together. I don't know. Nonetheless, we can watch some stuff. I thought about watching the Zizek films because I don't think they're copyrighted on YouTube. Like, I don't think so. The Zizek documentaries. So yeah. do Gary Becker Foucault assistant. It was very fun, man. Well, thank you. I'm glad. What do you think the values of morality in relation to political practice? Well, again, I'd always talk about like it's important. It's like almost impossible to escape. I say impossible. I don't. For me, I think it's impossible sometimes to escape some pretty intrinsic, like liberal ideals of like morality. And when we imagine, we can point out the problems with the conception and even implementation of morality, right? But I think when I think of a structuring of society, and if we're dealing with praxis, it's impossible not to bring morality in the mix. At least for me right now, I don't know any other way. But we're Western liberals, right? We live, in a liberal. We live in a society. That was the last good meme. But yeah, we live in Western liberal societies, so it's like it's very hard. There, like maybe to point to Chomsky's point, there still seems to be sort of a moral, rational justification. I don't know if I've quite. I see the problems with it, right? But I think as far as praxis goes, morality absolutely plays a big role, right? Badu, is that right? Badu? I thought it was Badu, but okay, yeah, it probably is. Why do people tend to say that late Foucault became a neoliberal? So I have gotten to the point where one, I don't know. I just want to say that maybe to some people there is a. I think ideology is a pretty powerful thing, and it doesn't matter where that stems. So say if you're someone who is very reluctant to embrace post-structuralism, or very reluctant, or because post-structuralism picks at so many things. We got to remember that things, even emancipatory left-wing politics like Marxism, is still very rooted in structuralism. Things within Marxism are still very rooted in a lot of liberal ideals in some regards. And there's a close proximity to late Enlightenment. And this is where post-structuralism seems to really break. And I think in some ways, especially with with more radical left-thinking people who are concerned with political emancipation, which is, again, that's me as well, a lot of people, I think there is a really overeager like conquest that happens. Like everything becomes a battleground, right? Like everything becomes a battleground. And if something can pick at an ideological foundation that might promise human emancipation, if there's any pointing out of any flaw, there's an innate sort of human reaction to that, right? Like that's not good. We don't like that. It's the same. Maybe in another way, like whenever right wing, it's well, that's probably not correct, but I think that's it, right? It picks at something that's very deeply ingrained into us, right? And sometimes it can be as simple as identification. We identify as anti-capitalist. We identify as these people as some sort of leftist or socialist, communist, whatever, and then as someone comes along and picks at some of the small things within that. Mind you, other leftists do this as well. Foucault's just one of those leftists that's a big target, I think. That's my theory. It's really stupid, and then you assign things like neoliberal to people like Foucault. It's just very short-sighted and dumb, but that's sort of my idea, I think. That's my rationale. I don't know. I wish people would probably read more and yeah. Just if you're gonna critique someone, it's probably if you're gonna critique a large thinker who's a philosopher himself, and you really want to contend with their work, it's probably a good idea to read them, rather than looking at a couple paragraphs, especially with someone like Foucault. You don't have to do that with everyone. Like, one doesn't have to fucking read Jordan Peterson or anything like that, or certain other people, but there are some people within sort of the academic tradition that I think in order to really contend with what they're saying, because they're saying complex things, like really complex things, you got to contend with their work, and that's hard for people, and I sympathize with that, but of course people handle it pretty poorly. So they just call Foucault a neoliberal. Yeah, labels always end up being frustrating. Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. So guys, I think that's it. I think it's 9 o'clock where I'm at. Yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. I want to say, before I head out, I always give the same spiel. Definitely couldn't do any of this without people on Patreon in the YouTube member section. Guys, if you guys want to support on Patreon, a couple dollars a month, it really ensures that I can keep doing this. Definitely couldn't do that without you. With a channel this size, it's hard to do this, hard to carve out the time to make this stuff happen. And all of you guys who are in the Patreon who do that, you guys make it happen. Early access to videos. You guys get some exclusive content. You guys get some editing tutorials, Discord access, stuff like that. So yeah, cool stuff. Guys, consider doing that. Thank you guys for being here. Again, we'll have to do this again soon. Guys, feel free to shoot me ideas. You can do that wherever, Twitter, Instagram, DMs, whatever. Shoot some ideas my way, and we can set something up again. So thank you guys all for being here, and take care.